if you have to do it, you will. You will get healthier. Just get up off the couch. And if it's, I mean, take that first step. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and you're not going to take that single step unless you're fired up to do it. So you got to get fired up about it. It can't be motivation. Don't confuse motivation with that passion, that inner fire. Motivation can spark it, but it's up to you to stoke the flames.
That is Jimmy Lee this week on the Do It For Yourself podcast. Hello there. How are you? Welcome back to another episode here on the Do It For Yourself podcast. I would just like to start by saying thank you for finding your way over to the Do It For Yourself podcast and hanging out with this week's guest, Jimmy Lee, and I, as we go through Jimmy's story. But before we get into Jimmy's story, I would just like to ask for a quick favor from you. Provided you are not operating a motor vehicle or any sort of heavy machinery while listening to this episode, if you could, just take a couple minutes and leave a review on whatever podcast platform you're currently listening on. It's just a small gesture that will take a couple minutes, but will help me out tremendously in growing this show, which is obviously a goal of mine because I would love to share these stories with as many people as we possibly can. So if you could do that, I would greatly, greatly appreciate that. As for this week's guest, as I said, my guest this week is Jimmy Lee, and Jimmy is the host of the Inner Fire podcast, and Jimmy has a story of how he is doing it for himself. Jimmy beat childhood obesity and was enjoying over a decade of health and fitness and cycling, riding. I was going to say cycling and riding his bike. Obviously, cycling is riding your bike. So Jimmy was enjoying his health and fitness, cycling, and martial arts up until the point where he had changed jobs and started working in a place that had some very, very serious chemicals. And these chemicals actually started impacting Jimmy's health to the point where he was gaining weight and could not figure out why. And so it wasn't until he had left this job and he wasn't around the chemicals anymore that he came to the conclusion that that was what was impacting his health. And so he went on a new journey to gain his health back and also find some peace of mind. And so he had the chance to do just that. And in that process, he began to build up his blog, which then led into his podcast, which then led into some voiceover work and some web design. So just from starting this simple blog, Jimmy has gone on to kind of really start some things on the side that he really enjoys. And it's all part of this story of how Jimmy is doing it for himself. So I'm really looking forward to sharing this interview with you. And without further ado, here is my conversation. All right, man. So let's get going here. And I just want to start off by saying, Jimmy, thank you so much for making an appearance on the Do It For Yourself podcast this evening and afternoon for you, where you are out on the West Coast. Looks like it was bright and sunny there from what I could tell coming through the window. So hope you're having a good afternoon out there. And I'm really looking forward to getting into your story here on the podcast today.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure to be here. It is a nice sunny day here in Southern California. We're recording this at the end of June in 2019. If you're listening to this in the future, whenever, when it was done, the summer is looking nice, and I am just doing outstanding. Thank you so much for inviting me on the show.
And do me a favor, just real quick, if you wouldn't mind, give us a little introduction and a little bit about what you're up to before we get into the health and fitness side of your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey folks, I'm Jimmy Lee. Thank you so much for tuning in to this podcast to hear my story. I host my own podcast called Inner Fire Podcast. I'm an actor, I do some voiceover work, and I'm also the webmaster for a website called stanmason.com. Please check that out. Good stuff going on there. You can find me on Twitter at Inner Fire Pod. There is a Facebook and Instagram too, but I'm most active on Twitter if you want to reach out to me, see some of the content. And yeah, that's about it from me.
And so, just out of curiosity, how many people do you run into, on a daily or weekly basis who are out on the West Coast, who are either trying to make it or who are up and coming actors, musicians, and the like?
Well, there's a lot of that type of work here. So there's definitely a lot of people that come here to do that, who live here that do that part time and what have you. And as far as up and coming and making it and success, I really think that people have to define that for themselves first to in order to determine if they're successful or trying to make it or what have you. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of people that do all types of work related to, I mean, any kind of content production you could think of on all different sides of the microphone and camera.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, there's so much to offer out there that it makes sense that you would, go out there to experience some of those things and have those doors that you could potentially be knocking on. It's very similar to New York here on the East Coast. If people want to make it, so to say, they go to New York. So I could see how that would be, a hotbed type of area for that. And as you mentioned before we started our recording, you're not too far from that LA, San Diego area, where a lot of these people are picking up side jobs while they're trying to hustle on their acting career or whatever it is they may be trying to launch. So I'm sure there's a few people in your network and in your area who are trying to get these things going.
Yeah, and honestly, in an area like this, when you're in a major market for something like that, whether that's Chicago for theater or, New York, there's a lot of voiceover stuff. There's a lot of theater there too. LA, obviously, the focus is on going to be on movies and television, but if you're in a major market and you have any inkling to maybe work in that industry at all, there's just so much work out there if you're reliable and even halfway decent, that you can pick up easy side work doing it. So it doesn't make sense not to try if you just have any thought of, hey, let's see what this is all about.
I think that that's true no matter what you're doing as well. I mean, even if you're not looking to make it in acting or voiceover or theater or, any of these things, if you have an inclination that you might be interested in something, you might as well give it a try. That there's so much opportunity, and especially in regards to acting and voiceover and all these things, with podcasting and the internet now, we have access to things that we've never had access to before. But even if you're, have an inkling that, hey, I might be interested in triathlon, or, I might be interested in this fitness or this diet, with this birth of the internet now, you have access to so much information that you may not have had access to before, that you can go research these things, give it a try. And if you don't like it, no harm, no foul. It's not like you invested crazy amounts of money into this information and had to go out and buy these courses and these books, because a lot of the things you can get for free or on the cheap just on the internet nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's how I started learning WordPress and, how to format a web page. And then, I did that for myself. I did examples of it. I did it for other people for free. And then my friend starts something and he's like, "Hey, I need your help. I'll pay you what I can when I can." And, then this business relationship is born, and now I'm the webmaster for this website. So you never know where things are going to take you if you just try, and you're interested. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even have to be acting. It can be coding, it can be learning to play music, it can be, I mean, gosh, getting in shape, like whatever, like just try it out.
And so, when you were starting your fitness journey, unfortunately, I'm not sure if you did have the access that we're talking about right now, because you had battled childhood obesity for quite some time. So, can you talk to me a little bit about what it was like for you while you were growing up, and some of the things that may have led to this childhood obesity, whether it was, what you had available to you for your food consumption at home, and kind of some of the things that you were going through in these very early stages of your childhood obesity.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in 1979, and that makes me like a baby Gen Xer, pretty much. And all the other people in my generation, about within my age or whatever, you'll hear them saying, "I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and there was only like one or two fat kids in my class, and now everybody's fat, and this, that, or the other." And it's like, well, I was one of those one or two fat kids, and everybody else wasn't super nice about it. But for like the first several years, like in elementary school, I wasn't really that fat, and it wasn't until middle school. I was the fat kid in middle school, so that's like the worst. Like that's the worst
Oh
time to be a
yeah,
fat kid. And
yeah.
that's actually the normal time when you are supposed to put on weight, and then you grow. You go through growth spurts, and then you grow out of it or whatever. But yeah, middle school was just merciless, like torments or whatever for being the fat kid. But it really does build character, and it's like now, in the modern era we live in, flash forward to where everybody's worried about a negative comment on social media. It's like, dude, like if the worst you have for me is a negative comment from some anonymous profile with like some like random picture or whatever, like you got nothing. I had people yelling in my freaking face every day like that I was worthless. So
Mm-hmm.
your negative social media is nothing. All right. So I think it's really funny actually in the world we live in today, where people are like, somebody said something mean online. It's like, so what? Like that, that person might not even exist. And it actually, in retrospect, hard times that you go through, that those are for growth and development. So, it's might seem tough if you're going through a tough time, but it's not all bad, because you come out on the other side of that stronger and more complex as an individual. So that, actually was a good thing. And then when I can't remember how old it was 12 or 13, I'm not sure, but I saw this guy on TV called Jack LaLanne. And I don't know if you know who Jack LaLanne is, do you?
No, I don't.
Oh my God, Jack LaLanne, he is a legend. All right, this guy, he basically showed people what bodybuilding was, and strength, and how to, like, if you pick up heavy things you'll get stronger. Like Jack LaLanne, this guy was a legend, and he saved so many lives by putting out the message of health and fitness for decades and decades and decades. And I remember seeing this guy. I remember he was in his early 80s, but I can't remember where he was at, if he was 81 or 84 or whatever. It was this little news report on him on TV, and it was in the summer, I remember. And this guy was in his 80s. He had already outlived both of my grandfathers, and he was doing more one-armed push-ups than the reporter who was in his 20s could do with both arms. And I said, I want to be like that guy. And so then I just started lifting heavy things and trying to do more. And also at that time, I was getting a little bit older, so you get a little more freedom. Your parents let you ride your bike a little bit farther to go play and things like that. And since luckily, I saw Jack LaLanne and got that message, because that's the perfect time for a human being in that adolescence when you've put on that weight as you're starting to go through puberty. That's the time when you are supposed to be moving around and burning it off. So luckily, I got that bug early, and then I remember the summer in between my 8th and ninth grade year, so out of middle school into high school, my local high school in Key West, Florida, where I grew up, the gym there, they would have the coaches go and open the gym. And if you were a high school student or a student going into high school, you could go there and use it for free. So my dad used to take me there in the summer, and that's where I really started to learn how to work out and lift weights and things like that. And then when I was, what was I? I think I was like 14. I started getting back into Taekwondo, and I had done that a little bit as a kid, but as a kid, you just sort of are introduced to things. You don't really like jump on anything, but
Yeah, you try just whatever your friends are trying. Everybody does t-ball, everybody does soccer, everybody does. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, so that was kind of a weird introduction. When I was like 7 or 8 years old, my mom worked as like the secretary at a local gym, and the guy that owned that gym also owned a Taekwondo dojo. So he let me go there for free as like a benefit because my mom worked for him or whatever. So I had that little introduction early, but I didn't really stick with it because once she stopped working there, they couldn't afford for me to go and all
Hmm.
that stuff. But when I was 14, so I was 13 in between high school, I started to learn about weightlifting. I was 14, I got into martial arts, and then of course it was like me riding my bike because I was old enough that okay, you can ride your bike to class by yourself. So I'm riding my bike to the dojo, and I'm lifting weights after school and things. And so very quickly, I took off that fat kid from middle school, became a fit kid in high school, and then I just kind of enjoyed a decade of health and fitness. And along the way, I learned how to cook. One thing I did, I worked probably about 75 to 80 hours a week for like 6 years in different restaurants as I was growing up. And so I learned a lot about food and cooking. And like, I think I did the calculation the other day. I think I've spent over 27,000 hours cooking professionally. And they say you need 10,000 hours to master something. Well, I definitely mastered food and cooking and flavor. But I didn't know anything about health. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a dietitian. Like, I can tell you all about the food and the history and the flavors and the presentation, but I don't know if it's healthy or not. I know it tastes good. I know it looks good. I know it goes together.
Well,
That's where it ends.
and I think that that's really common for a lot of chefs. Like, And no offense to anybody that's in the food industry, because I do know some chefs who are extremely, extremely fit. Like I interviewed Chef Jared from No Name, which is actually out in California, oddly enough. And I mean, he's a vegan chef, super, super fit. Like, so it's, I'm not saying that this, it's not possible to be fit and be a chef, but if you look at a majority of chefs and you look at, a lot of these chefs that you see on Food Network and some of these things, like a lot of these guys are, and girls, they are not exactly what you would consider super fit. And, they're constantly, although they're constantly on the move, they're constantly working. They're working crazy hours. They know what tastes good, so they know how these flavors go together, and they're tasting as they're cooking. And, a lot of the times some of these sauces and everything else are very high in fat. So, I can see how, even though you had this great knowledge of food and putting things together, how that could almost work as a negative for you at times, because you're cooking based off of your taste and what you've learned in the kitchen. And you may not necessarily be cooking based off of what would be the best options for you specifically when it comes to weight loss.
Yeah, and if you're working pastry, then part of your job is literally tasting cakes. So, I
Uh
mean,
huh.
there's only so far you can go with the fitness and the exercise when your job is tasting cakes for a living, right?
And so I want to take a little bit of a step back to when I have one question for you from when you really, really started. And then I have a follow-up question for you when you started going to your high school gym. So the first thing that I wanted to touch on was when you started working out, and this was before you started going to the dojo. You said you were lifting heavy things, and you got really inspired to start lifting weights. Where were you lifting? Were you going to a gym? Were you doing things at home? Where was this all happening?
So that was just all at home. And my parents had one of those like combination exercise machines where, you could hook up the thing and do the pull downs, or you could change it to do a press, like, one of those combo
Mm-hmm.
pulley system things out on the porch. So I did that a little bit. I realized if I filled buckets with varying levels of water, that would give me different levels of weight, and I could either curl it or pick it up over my head like a shoulder press type of thing, and just kind of using whatever I could. Push ups, but at first I couldn't do a push up. When I saw Jack LaLanne do those push ups, I'm like, how many push ups can I do? I had never done a push up in my life,
Mm-hmm.
and I was pretty overweight. I don't know my weight at the time, but I know I had the chest and waist measurements of an adult as a 13-year-old. Um, and I tried to do a push up, and I couldn't even do a single push up at all. But I just kept trying and kept at it. And then, jump flash forward another 13, 14 years, and that 13-year-old that couldn't do a single push-up was knocking out like 73, 75 push-ups in one shot. So if you set your mind to something, you will do it for yourself and you will accomplish it.
And the part that's very, very interesting to me is that you mentioned that at this point when you received this information and you saw Jack LaLanne, you were at a very um, I guess a very open point in your life. You were very receptive to information, and it came to you at a really good time. And so you took this information and you took what you saw in Jack LaLanne and you wanted to apply that for yourself. Um, but why did it click for you at that point, do you think? Because for me, I was the same as you. I was the overweight kid in middle school and into high school. And the part that's interesting is that when I was at that age, My mom worked at a gym. I had access to a gym. I had access to personal trainers. My mom was an instructor at the gym. I had so many resources, and I didn't even want to take advantage of them at that time. And I had people who were willing to help me, and I still didn't take advantage of that. So why is it that it clicked for you at that point in time?
I think it was because a combination of things. Number one, Jack LaLanne was one of the most inspiring individuals who's ever spoken a single word. Like, this guy was absolutely incredible. Number two, probably the see like you don't appreciate what you have until it's gone, right? And I didn't have any of that, uh, a lot of that support like you're talking about. It's funny when you say that. I feel the same way about when I grew up in Key West, and one of my hugest regrets is not spending more time on the beach and scuba diving, because I didn't appreciate that I could just do it like whenever, right? And I think that why I grabbed onto Jack LaLanne's advice was a combination of right place, right time in both the mindset. I was at a very impressionable age. Um, the just the amazement that this like 80 something year old dude was doing these push-ups. Like, at that point in my life, the only people that I had seen past 60 were walking with canes and like struggling to live, and this guy was just vibrant and full of life. Both my grandfathers were gone by that time, and so like to see this guy that had outlived them doing this stuff, that made a huge impression at the impressionable age, when I needed it most. And I, was a lonely kid for a long time because I got picked on in middle school. I didn't have a lot of friends. So when I saw that TV broadcast, I was alone, like a lot of solitude. And seeing this old guy doing all this, it fits so good with the format of your show, that do it for yourself. Like, this guy only did it for himself. And I was like, oh, I can do that too. Like, it's all like, it's up to me. And I never became like a great athlete or anything, but I got myself off the couch, and I got myself fit enough to do the things that I enjoyed to do. So I think it was really right place, right time, right mindset, like all the stars align, if you want to get woo woo with it. But it was just that one of those perfect moments where everything all like came through, and that was like that catalyst I needed to really kind of start down that journey.
And when you were then in the high school gym and you were going there for that summer in between your middle school and high school year, I know you said the coaches were coming to unlock the gym, but were the coaches staying and hanging out? Were they helping you in any way? Were they correcting form as far as the weightlifting goes? Like, were you getting direction from anyone on this fitness journey as you were going into high school?
Well, they did something even better than that. They were in there working out. So instead of, being that typical coach that you would get, like, hey, come on, five more, like, they were in there. That was their off season to get all their paperwork ready, make sure all the equipment was good, yada yada yada. And these guys were gym rats themselves, so they were taking advantage of the resources they had. So instead of being in there going like a free class, like, oh, this is how you do it, they were just in there doing it. So you could see the right way to bench press or leg press or whatever. And then plus my dad was there with me, and I mean, he was never like a great athlete or anything either, but he was in the Navy. He did a little bit of working out, when he was younger. He was very familiar with safe ways to lift and all that. So my dad gave me a lot of the one-on-one, and but then the coaches that worked at the school, you could just watch them do their stuff. And it was so great. It was like having just a living, diagram right there that you could just look, oh, that's how you do it, kind of thing. So I like to say they did one better. They kept to themselves and did their own workouts, and that was such a great example to know that, oh, a coach isn't somebody that just yells at you. Like, they actually go and they walk the walk, when they can.
I was just gonna say they were leading by example. Some people it's and I guess it depends on your personality in that particular situation. Having someone lead by example and not being the person on the sidelines yelling and screaming and saying, no, you're doing it wrong. Um, Having somebody just being quiet and leading by example is what worked really well for you, and that's how you kind of started your foundation, and you ended up going on to have a decade's worth of health and fitness, and you started to find some things that you really enjoyed doing and some things that helped you maintain this level of fitness. And you said you didn't go on to be some superstar athlete in any particular sport or anything like that, but after you shed the weight from this childhood obesity and you found these activities, you were able to continue some of these things well into your adulthood and post high school. So what were some of these things that you got to try, and how were you exposed to some of these different avenues of fitness that maybe weren't just lifting heavy things in the weight room?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, well, weightlifting and martial arts were the two biggest things. And like I mentioned, my mom worked at a gym, and then she was the secretary there when I was like 7 or 8 years old. And I don't know if we mentioned this before or on the air, but so my mom worked at a gym as the secretary. I was like 7 or 8 years old. That guy that owned the gym also owned a Taekwondo dojo. He let me go there. So as a little kid, I had that introduction to that. Oh, this stuff is out there. And then once I got a little bit older, when I was like 14, I wanted to get back into it. I wasn't really into the sports at school. I didn't, have a lot of friends, so the team sports didn't really seem appealing to me. It's like, oh, do I want to go hang out with all the kids that just made fun of me for 3 years, or do I want to go somewhere where they are just not? So
Hmm.
I found a place where they were not, and that was the Taekwondo dojo. And by that time, the guy that my mom had worked for, he had retired and sold off his stuff, his businesses. And one of his main students who remembered me and my parents had actually taken over as the main instructor, so they welcomed me back into the family, and I met some of the best friends that I've ever had in my life in that dojo. My buddy Will Soto, great guy. Hey, if anybody listening ever goes down to Key West, Florida, go to the Sunset Celebration. Look for that crazy juggler on the tightrope. That's my buddy Will. Love you, brother, if you're listening. And anyway, that lasted a long time. Eventually, I stopped going to that dojo and just explored different types of martial arts and weightlifting with my friends. And then guys that I met at the neighborhood gym, they would show me workouts and stuff. If you if you talk to whatever you're into, whether it's a sport or an activity or a skill, talk to the old guys that have been doing it for a while, because they might not know all the newest stuff, but they know what works, and that's really important, especially as a foundation for something like weightlifting or martial arts. So those were the main things, and that's kind of how I got exposed to that, just through right place, right time. Like I said, serendipity, I guess. And then cycling, riding my bike. I grew up in Key West, as I mentioned. That is a very small island. You can ride all around it on your bicycle. And once I started getting a little older, a little more freedom, and I could ride a little farther. Okay, you can ride down to the arcade and back. You can ride to the beach or the dojo or what have you, to school and all that. That was a lot of freedom. So I really embraced that. And with the nature of Key West the way it is, you can actually get around quicker on a bicycle than you can in a car if you're just on the one island. So that's how I got into cycling. And I just loved it because I could go anywhere on my little island I wanted, and nobody bothered me, and I didn't have to stop and fill up for gas. All my friends were complaining, "Oh, I got a car. Oh, now I need gas money." Well, I don't. Haha. See you downtown. um, but yeah, it was great, and just it was so much freedom being able to go and cycle wherever I wanted, and to be able to go and do my workouts when I wanted, where I wanted. I grabbed onto it, and I was just cycling everywhere, all over that island. And then the other thing was swimming, which, I mean, I lived on an island. I actually, this is a true fact. I'm not like just saying this for embellishment. I literally learned to swim before I learned how to walk. So when I, got older, and then again, I could do my own thing, do whatever I wanted, I started getting more into swimming. And then right after I graduated high school, um, I didn't take the traditional college route, and I wanted to, just sort of figure my life out. And, my family didn't have any money. I didn't want to get into debt or whatever. And I realized that I could take some classes at the local community college just to like explore things. And they had this one class called fitness swim. And I had been swimming for a long time, but I knew that I could technically be better with the form and stuff. So I took that class, and I realized as an 18 or 19-year-old young man that the 5 a.m. fitness swim class for the local community college was also the same time that the high school girls swim team would be practicing. And I was like, well, this is a good class to take. And then so I really did just fall in love with the swimming. And so, like, um, through a combination of weightlifting, swimming, cycling, and martial arts, I was able to stay fit. And, after high school, I'd get up early and go either swim or weightlift or whatever, or sometimes I'd go after work, and I just sort of made it a part of my life. And so from about 16 to 26 or 27, I was really, really fit. I guess you could consider me athletic, although I didn't play a sport. I wasn't technically an athlete.
And it's so, I guess it's odd because of all the serendipity that you've had in your life with some of these activities, and living in Key West, being into cycling so much, being into swimming. I'm fairly certain there's a pretty big triathlon that occurs down in Key West, but you never participated in it.
Never. I was never into the competitive sports or any of that. And that actually comes from studying martial arts. And you'll see a lot of guys get into the tournament thing. Like Joe Rogan's a great example. I mean, when he was younger, he was doing all kinds of martial arts tournaments and stuff. And I never got into that. Everybody wanted me to go compete and all that. And there were two reasons I never did. Number one, I didn't have the money. I didn't have the tournament fees. I didn't have the time to go off somewhere. Because when you're in Key West and you want to go to a Taekwondo tournament, you got to go up to Miami, which means you're going up, you're spending the night, you got to get a hotel, you got to pay for the thing. And it was just like, it was not like logistically good for me, but also like I didn't like the idea of it, and not knocking anyone who does it, because it's a great challenge for you to see where you're at. But I always looked inward for that inner struggle, and that I don't know how else to put it, but the inner challenge of the martial arts. Because as a kid growing up, being the fat kid in middle school, getting teased, you get a lot of anger issues. And then as you grow up and you start to get a stronger body and you start to get a little faster and you start to learn all these moves, and then you realize, oh, I could really hurt somebody. Let me get this in check. I don't want to go to an event where they will reward me for beating the shit out of somebody. Like, that seemed like a really bad idea for the mental state I was in at the time. So I focused on the inner struggles and, like, how can I get more on my bench press? I don't care who wins the trophy type of thing, you know?
But I think that the you wanting to focus on the inner struggle and focus on not the competitive side, and your interest not being in competition, really at all, I think was more intense than not having the resources to go to the competition. Because it seems like if you really wanted to go to the competition, regardless of what the financial situation was, I feel like you would have, you figured out a way to get there if it was something that was really a burning passion that you wanted to do, because you figured out a way to get to the gym when you wanted to get to the gym. You rode your bike to the gym, and you figured out ways to, beat childhood obesity and get to be the person that you wanted to be. So you had this inclination inside to accomplish the things that you were really passionate about and the things that you really, really wanted. You had the ability to accomplish those things. I think that it's just you it wasn't there for you. It just wasn't piquing your interest to go there and do that.
Oh, I would agree with you 100%. And basically, I'm giving you the internal and external. The internal reason is obviously greater than the external reason. I could have overcome that external obstacle had I really, needed to find a way, obviously. But yeah, it just never really appealed to me. And it's like, I like knowing that I can take care of myself if I have to, defend myself or whatever. But I had been in enough fights in middle school. I didn't want to go to a
Hmm.
whole thing where it was like, oh, now you're rewarded for fighting. I
Hmm.
spent 3 years having it drilled into my head. That's bad. Don't fight.
Right, right.
And then it's like, oh, yeah, go do this thing, and it did not appeal to me. And so, yeah, you're 100% right. I did not find a way over that external obstacle because I didn't have the internal desire to go on that direction with my journey.
100%. 100%. And so your journey then takes a little bit of a different turn because your health was impacted in a different way, and your initial health and fitness journey was one that you were overweight, as we just talked about, and you wanted to make a change in regards to, what was going on with your body, um, both internally and externally. But when you started a new job and you were kind of changing jobs and starting this new career, you ended up working with some very, very intense chemicals that completely just jacked your health up. And so, talk to me a little bit about what was going on at that point and what you were doing during this time, what you were working with, and kind of what this career was.
So yeah, when I was 26 years old, I left the restaurant industry. I joined the United States military. I was in the Army from 2006 to 2010, and I was 26 years old. I joined the infantry, and that alone should be a testament to my level of physical fitness at the time. To beat out 18-year-olds on the physical fitness test, to get through all that training and what have you. And then, since I was a little bit older and had a little more life experience, they gave me a little more responsibility. I got sent to a new unit. And so in a new unit, you need to find positions for everything. I ended up as our unit armorer. And the chemicals that I worked with on their own in a normal way of using them, they're very benign. You often use them outdoors, the solvents for cleaning weapons, what have you. They're pretty safe to use as long as you use them in a well-ventilated area and whatnot. But when you're working with gallons of this stuff in a closed, vaulted room that is a secure location, and there's no ventilation, and it builds up in the air and on the tables, and it soaks through your clothes and things like that. And if you go and work with vehicles and something happens and the guy turns the wrong screw and you get transmission fluid on you and you're just working like that for 10 hours or what have you, there's a lot of these petrochemicals that build up and will disrupt your endocrine system. And of course, this is not the fault of the United States government or the military in any way. I have nothing but good things to say about the military and the army and the government. It was an unfortunate situation with the things that happened to me. But the main point of all this, and the job is really irrelevant and all that, but the main chemical that I was working with and I did a lot of research to figure out all these different substances that I worked with. The main chemical is polyalpha olefins. Now, these are a synthetic polymer that are actually an incredible chemical. They have a wide variety of uses in solvents, cleaners, adhesives, like all over the place. These things are used in the government, civilian worlds, all over it. They really did change our lives by inventing these polyalpha olefins. But unfortunately, if they're in an oil, the form of an oil, oils are fat soluble. So if they soak into your clothes and soak through your skin, the oils will then soak into your skin. This can disrupt your endocrine system, causing weight gain, fatigue, confusion, all this kind of stuff. And also, if these things are in an aerosol form, which some of them were, because we had a lot of different substances that we did work with, it's fine if you're in a ventilated area. But if you're not in a ventilated area, even small amounts, you breathe them in, they cause lung damage. So as a result, I started gaining weight with no change in diet and exercise. No change in diet and exercise. And that's the key point. It certainly wasn't for lack of exercise. I was doing stuff on my own after work because I had friends who loved weightlifting as much as I did. I was doing our regular stuff in the mornings, and no change in diet and exercise. I gained 50% of my starting body weight. I was 191 pounds of solid steel and sex appeal, as I like to say. And then I went from 191 pounds to 272 pounds, and
Wow.
I could barely walk up a flight of stairs from running a 6.5 minute mile. So, no change in diet and exercise. I simply had this new job, and then unfortunately, there are enough people who will scam and sham their way out of duties and responsibilities. Not everybody. Such a small percentage of people, but that one bad apple spoils the whole damn bunch
Mm-hmm.
saying. It's really true. You got a couple of guys who want to get out of something, and then they've got to be skeptical of everything just because a standard procedure. So it's like, oh, you put on initially, oh, you put on some weight, like happens to everybody after basic. Don't worry about it. You're going to take it off. Your run time's solid. You got good PT scores. Like, it's going to be fine. Okay. Little while later, Wow, you're really getting lazy. Well, but I haven't changed any of my routines. Well, you better work harder. You got to figure something out. And it's like, well, there's something wrong, you know? And then I can't run as fast. And it's like, well, you got to try harder, drink more water. No, no, no. Literally, I can't fucking breathe, guys. Something's wrong. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, excuse, excuse, excuse. And then you punt this for 2 years, and then suddenly nobody remembers when I was fit because new guys come and go. And when you get stuck in a position, right? Normally, see, this is what happens with the way that works is normally guys rotate in and out. You know, people do their duty and then they go do other jobs.
Right.
But if you get hurt, the people above you trying to help you, that like you, that want to save your career, say, let's give you a little bit longer to get back in shape so you don't rotate out and then you get a bad score on your next test. And then, and they try to help. But then the whole problem was the work environment. See, when most people rotate out was when I started to have these medical problems, like right at that time. And this isn't, I don't want anybody to think, I mean, God, people have conspiracies about everything. There's no conspiracy here. It's not like there's somebody knows like, oh, you'll get hurt or sick if you stay longer than 6 months. It's just a weird thing that worked out that way. It was a really weird tumblers needed to fall into place to unlock this door on this journey I went through, if that makes sense. So it was just a really unfortunate set of circumstances, and then people trying to be helpful that were not helping in the right way, and then doctors who weren't listening, and all this other shit. And eventually it got so bad after a couple years it was like, well, dude, you can't run, your ankle's fucked up, your shoulder isn't right, like you got all these problems, we got to medically discharge you. And it's like, okay, well, whatever. So then health and fitness ruined, all of that ripped away, very, very depressed. So not only had I lost my health and fitness, I didn't have my peace of mind either. And fortunately, right about as I was getting out of the military, I met this wonderful, wonderful woman who is now my wife. We got kids together. Everything is so awesome. And she really helped me kind of start to get my peace of mind back. And then after I left that job, got out of the military, I was like, oh, let me go back to my roots in cooking. I know how to do this. I got the skills. I went to culinary school for a year. And then I realized that it was pretty difficult for me to work in restaurants because if you're working on a busy line cooking, even though you have the ventilation and all that stuff, there's a lot of smoke and grease and stuff in the air, and you got to clean with all the chemicals and the sprays at the end of the night. So I couldn't go back to my old job. I couldn't do my new job because I got medically discharged. And then, I was in this whole weird state, and I decided to just look back to food to try to start my journey towards health, fitness, and peace of mind, because at least that's what I knew, even if I couldn't work with it.
And when you were in the military and you were doing this job, were there multiple people that were also doing this job, or were you the only person who was doing this job?
This is a situation where I worked with other people sometimes. Um, I don't really want to get into like numbers and stuff because
Yeah, yeah, that's fine.
we're talking about like inside of a arms room for a unit, and this kind of gets into information you're not really supposed to talk about. But there were other people I did work with. Some of them worked as frequently as me. Some worked less frequently as me. There were other people who had weird health problems too.
That's what I was getting at with that question. I wanted to know, if you were the only person who had this experience, or if there were other people that had this experience as well, and if it was just the way that these chemicals reacted with your body, or if other people had the same reactions.
There were other people that had some of the similar reactions that I had. Things
Okay,
affect
yeah.
different people, but they didn't listen either. I was like, guys, I'm telling you, it's this stuff that we're working with. And they're like, no, everybody else is fine. And I'm like, no, but look, we got like gallons of this shit here, and we don't have the ventilation. Like, if maybe we should wear a mask, or I don't fucking know. Like, I don't know the right thing, but I'm telling you, we all started working with this stuff, and then you're getting sick like this, I'm getting sick like that, this, that, and nobody listened. Like, I was just the crazy guy who didn't know anything. I was just fat and lazy and didn't drink enough water. It was like middle school all over again. It was the same thing. You're fat, you're lazy, you don't try hard enough. And it's like, I've heard all this shit before. You guys don't want to listen. So eventually I just stopped talking, and I just accepted that, okay, I'm broken and you're going to medically discharge me now. I think it sucks. I really, liked my job. I would have been happy staying to do it, but I have lung damage and I can't run. And if you can't run, you don't really make a very good soldier.
And so, were there any parallels that you can draw between starting your first fitness journey and then having to start that fitness journey over again? Were there things that you immediately went back to, or did you kind of take a different road this time because of the situation that you were in? Like you said, you couldn't lift anymore. You couldn't run anymore because of the respiratory issues that you were having. So, how did you begin again?
So that's a great question. And obviously, the stuff that worked before wasn't going to work again because I had a different situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was I started walking. That's the main thing. Walk when I can. I figured I'm just going to enjoy what I have left. So I started walking a little bit, and then I was like, this is like what they say doesn't make any sense. It's totally not my fault. And I am going to go get a second opinion. So after I got out, I spent like probably between $25,000 and $30,000 of my own money to go get second, third, fourth opinions from different doctors and try to figure out, okay, what can we do? What's the best way to detox and start healing and all of this stuff? And then on my end, I started looking into the diet, like, oh, is there some kind of good diet I can go on? Like, what can I do? Started doing the things a lot of people do. I read all of Michael Pollan's books and watched the documentaries at that time, like King Corn and all the food documentaries on Netflix and what have you. And I started trying to think like, oh, let me try to eliminate certain things and then add them back in. And that's been a great protocol that I've used for the past 9 years is, you cut something out of your diet for a while, you add it back in and observe what happens to your body. It's kind of a long, tedious process, but it's really, really effective. And so I started looking at things like, oh, well, maybe I can cut out the high fructose corn syrup. Maybe I have a problem with soy, looking into all these different things. Eventually, flash forward from 2010 to 2014, I found a doctor who figured out, oh, you have this genetic issue where you don't absorb the B vitamins. Let's get you on a B12 supplement. And then that same doctor mentioned that I might want to try going gluten free. I asked her why, and she told me, I don't know. I've just seen it work for some people. So try it for 30 days and then add it back in and see what happens. I'm like, okay, well, that's what I've been doing with stuff. So I tried the gluten free. And then when I added it back in, I had all kinds of health problems, and I said, "Oh man, do I have a problem with gluten? Like, what is this?" And that was that was 2014, so you started hearing more about gluten-free stuff and what have you.
Hmm.
Let's flash forward to 2019 real quick right now, and we'll go back a bit. I realized the problem's not the gluten. The problem is legumes, right? And so, legumes, for people who don't know, are any fruit that is encased in a pod. So, peanuts, beans, peas, lentils, those things. The problem with legumes, why I thought it was a gluten allergy, right? Well, the thing that is in almost every single pre-made baked good on the shelf is soybean oil. It's cheap, it makes things taste good, and it makes baked goods soft, and they last a long time, right? So soy is a legume. So it wasn't the gluten, it was the soybean oil in the bread or the cakes or the pastries, and that's what was messing me up.
How did you narrow that down?
Oh, so that took a long time. For the longest time, I thought it was soy because I would try things with soy, I would get sick, right?
Hmm.
And so, okay, no soy, no problem. But the breathing disorder, the lung damage, right, from the chemicals that I worked with, that was an unfortunate situation and is nobody's fault in any way whatsoever. That I would have problems at night, right? I still have problems at night depending on environmental conditions where I'll wake up coughing, I can't breathe, I need my inhaler, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And so after gluten free, about a year after I found gluten free, I found this whole idea of low carb through NSNG, the no sugars, no grains. And that's basically the basis of what I eat now. But with NSNG, it's like no sugar, no grains, right? And it's pretty simple. I shouldn't have to explain it too much after that. But
Right.
one of my old staples was rice and beans. Like I love black beans and yellow rice. That's a classic Cuban food. It's all over the
Hmm.
Keys in South Florida. It's delicious, and I make it really well. And well, if when I went no sugar, no grains, well, no grains, rice is a grain. So I
Hmm.
stopped eating the beans and rice, and I started getting a little easier time breathing. I didn't have so many asthma attacks, and I was like, "Oh man, there's something to this no grain thing. It's got to be the grains." And then one night, uh, it was the weirdest thing. The kids were off being watched in a safe place at their little after school thing, and my wife and I went out to get a bite to eat and just have a moment of adult time alone, just sitting together, because that's what you do when you're married, folks. Everybody thinks they sneak away to the bedroom. No, we just want to go have pie and not be screamed at. That's what happens when you're a parent. But anyway, my wife and I go out to go get something to eat. She had nachos. They had beans on them. I had a salad or something. I can't remember, but she's like, "Oh, these are like really good, and you haven't made nachos in a long time. You should try these." I'm like, "Okay." I ate a chip. I'm like, all right, pretty good, whatever. That night had a massive asthma attack in the middle of the night, and I woke up just coughing and just going crazy. I couldn't figure it out, and my wife, half asleep, is like, "It's the beans." And I was like, "What?" And then I was like, "Oh my god." And then I realized it's all of the legumes. When I have peanuts, I have problems where I'm coughing. If I have other nuts that are processed with peanuts, I have problems and I'm coughing. Beans and rice, soy, all of it, always asthma attacks. And it was just through the elimination and then adding things back in that I narrowed it down. And it took like forever. I wish I could have just known this a long time ago, but here we are. And that's how I figured that out. And I know we kind of got off on a little bit of a tangent. So please let me know where you want me to skip back to.
No, no, no. You're totally fine. And I think that's very interesting that the elimination. A lot of people use elimination diets to figure out a lot of things. This isn't the first time I've heard of it. I had another friend who was having a lot of issues as well, and she actually reverted back to I mean, such a super, super basic diet that was very bland. But she stuck with that for quite some time to then start adding things back in, and just like you said, kind of see where she was and see how she felt. So that could be very, very beneficial for people. And not only can it be beneficial for people who are struggling from health issues, but just for people who are struggling in general, especially when it comes to things like weight loss or health. um, Eliminating things and then adding them back in to see how that makes you feel is very, very important. And I've told this story before on the podcast, but when I was going through my weight loss journey, obviously I tried to stay away from a lot of fast food and a lot of food that was prepared with tons and tons of grease, right? So if you go and get a burger somewhere, something that's just prepared in a lot of grease, Five Guys, oh God, the other one just went out of my head. It's got a green sign. Any of these burger places that have, super, super high levels of grease, I eliminated a lot of these things. And now, if I have something like that that's super high in grease, super just really not great for you, I can literally feel the impacts on my body almost immediately after finishing that meal. And so I know that those things aren't good for me. And now, because I eliminated them and I didn't have them for so long, I can actually feel how it's not good for my body. So I think that this elimination and then adding back in can be very beneficial for people, not just who are struggling from, a health issue and trying to figure out potentially why they could be experiencing asthma attacks or something like that. Just in general, it's a good practice so that you can become more aware of how certain foods make you feel. Because ideally, if you are on a journey yourself, you want to feel really good. And so if you can identify things that aren't making you feel good, you can then eliminate those things and get back to the person that you are striving to become.
Absolutely. I there's this guy on Twitter. He's a strength coach, Alex Bernier. He's at My Thought Food, and he often says if you just eat food, observe its effects on your body, and adjust from there, you're gonna figure it out. And that's it's such a true statement. Just see, and again, that internal journey, the journey within, uh, you will then figure out the effects on your own body. Absolutely.
And so, as we kind of start to get wrapped up here, I'm gonna ask you a question that I ask a lot of my guests, and it's in one different form or another. But being as you have started a journey to do it for yourself, not once but twice, um, and the second time, unfortunately, was something that was in fact completely out of your control, but it was no fault of anyone's. You've had a lot of experience with starting and taking that first step. So I want you to think back to the time when you're watching TV and you make that decision to take the first step, and you actually go and take that first step. And to the next time when you're medically discharged and you have to start over again, and instead of sitting and wallowing and being depressed and going down probably so many different roads that you could have gone down, you take that first step to start getting your health back, getting your peace of mind back. And as you're thinking of those two times, my question to you is, if you have someone who comes to you and they say, Jimmy, you've done this so many times, you've taken the first step and you know how to get started, you've done it. I don't know what to do. I want to do this. I want to start a business. I want to go on this fitness journey. I want to begin doing voiceover work. I want to learn how to do coding. I want to do something, but I haven't taken the first step. What piece of advice do you have to offer to that person that could get them off the couch the same way that you got off the couch?
Well, that's a very good question. And basically, it comes down to what is it that really gets you fired up? And that's it. What gets you fired up? Because you hear a lot of people that talk about these things where like follow your passion, and that's it. When something lights your inner fire, you don't I don't think you really have a choice but to do it. I think, who was it? I think it was either William H. Macy or Jeff Daniels. I can't remember. One of those two said about acting, if you have to do it, you will. And it's just like that with literally anything. If you have to do it, you will. And if you're worried about your health, like if you have to do it, you will. You will get healthier. Just get up off the couch. And if it's, I mean, take that first step. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And you're not going to take that single step unless you're fired up to do it. So you got to get fired up about it. It can't be motivation. Don't confuse motivation with that passion, that inner fire. Motivation can spark it, but it's up to you to stoke the flames. And that's really the best thing I got.
Well, I appreciate that. And I also completely agree with you because motivation is only going to take you so far. And when you're in the dark, dark times, that little light of motivation is going to go out pretty quick. Like you said, you got to have something that's going to keep you going once that motivation wears off. So I just want to take a minute and say thank you, and recognize you for coming on the podcast and sharing your story very openly. And I really appreciate that. And I look forward to sharing this one with my audience. So thank you. And that's it. Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure.
So that is the story of Jimmy Lee and how he is doing it for himself. I can't believe the impact that these chemicals he was working with had on his body and his health. But I think that it is very admirable that Jimmy looked at this point in his life as an opportunity to grow and an opportunity to find something new. Because, as Jimmy said in the interview, we are all going to go through these hard times. And those hard times, they need to be looked at as a point for which we can grow and we can learn. And it's something that we are all going to go through. And I think that that is just something that is very, very important to note about Jimmy's story. So thank you to Jimmy for coming on the podcast and sharing his story with us today. And thank you, the listener, for tuning in and listening to Jimmy's story today. I really enjoyed sharing this one with you. If you could take a minute and leave a review. As I said in the intro, that would be something that would help me out tremendously, and I would really appreciate it. And as you find yourself on your travels or hanging out with your friends, family, and you come across somebody who you think may enjoy one of the interviews we have here on the Do It For Yourself podcast, just mention it to them. Share this with the people that you know and bring some more people into this community. I would really, really appreciate that. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your week, and I look forward to bringing you another interview next week.